In Chapter 5, we're going to be talking about executive leadership. And this is where we're going to look at both theoretical and practitioner views. So when we talk about executive leadership, we're going to be talking today about the CEO's job. So the CEO, again, is the Chief Executive Officer of the nonprofit organization, and they are the paid individual who is running the organization on a day-to-day basis. So this is a list of the 10 basic responsibilities of a typical nonprofit CEO. The first is that they're committed to the mission. And this is critical, that there is that individual, personal commitment to the mission and to the purpose of the nonprofit organization, because they are going to be leading the staff and managing the organization. And in order for them to be effective in leading the staff and managing the organization, they must be committed to the mission, which is the first one. They must exercise responsible financial stewardship. So it's critical that the nonprofit organization CEO be responsible fiscally. It's their job to lead and manage the fundraising. So other people will be participating in all of this, but it's the CEO's job to be in charge, ultimately in charge, overseeing everyone and all of the efforts. So they also follow the highest ethical standards, ensure accountability, and comply with the law. So it's critical that they are ethical, they are accountable, and that they comply with all the laws, because they are, again, in charge of the day-to-day. These are the paid individuals that are the CEOs. They engage in the board in the planning. They engage the board in planning, and they lead the board in implementation of the policies and procedures and the programs that are developed. The CEO develops future leadership for the organization. They oversee the hiring and replacement of individuals and who will be on the board down the road and all those things for future leadership. The CEO builds the external relationships also and serves as the organization's advocate. So these are the people who are out also on a day-to-day basis interacting with the community and serving as an advocate of the organization. The CEO ensures the quality and effectiveness of programs, because they work with the board in determining what the organization's programs are going to be. So they will be in charge of the quality and effectiveness. And they're also to provide support to the board itself. So there are observations about a CEO's responsibilities that are discussed in the textbook. And this is where there's talking about significant overlap between the CEO's responsibilities and the governing board's responsibilities. There's a significant number of areas of shared responsibility. And that's important for you to understand for those of you who have not worked with any kind of board of directors or been in an executive director or CEO position, is that they don't operate the same from one organization to another. There are general guidelines and there are ideals, but each one may be different from the other, and there's oftentimes overlap in areas of responsibility which can cause challenges and conflicts. The mission, financial stewardship, fundraising, accountability, planning, performance standards, and the work of the board itself, these are all areas of potential overlap. The CEO's responsibilities involve both managing and leading. That's important for distinction to be made, is that the person who is paid, the chief executive officer of the organization, has responsibilities of both managing and leading the organization. So what is managing the organization? This is a concern with the day-to-day operations, making things work. This includes policies, procedures, rules, and processes. It's transitional. The manager provides rewards in exchange for work contributions or imposes sanctions on those who do not meet the requirements of their assignments. So this is talking about on a day-to-day basis, the manager, the CEO, is in charge of providing the rewards in exchange for work contributions or imposing sanctions. So if somebody does a good job, they might get a raise. If somebody does a bad job, they might lose their job. So it is the organization's CEO who is responsible for that. The how versus the where versus the why, concerned with managing smooth operations versus change. So this is the discussion that talks about what management of a nonprofit organization is, the how, the where, the why, and concern with maintaining a smooth operation versus change. So we're going to talk about leadership. And this is about purpose, vision, and direction of a nonprofit organization. Where, why versus how. There should be some quotes on how. But the where and the why versus the how. The how would be the implementation in the day-to-day. Leadership is inactive. It's a process of involving a relationship between the leader and the people being led. There are no leaders without followers, and both play a part. Leaders are focused on change, movement toward the achievement of some kind of defined goal. So those are the people who are in charge, or the person in the CEO in charge of focusing on change and movement toward the defined goal, or leadership as the board being in charge of moving the organization toward the goal. Leadership is the responsibility that cannot be delegated. So this is more discussion about management versus leadership, and talking about day-to-day versus being a visionary. So under managers in this table, we talk about managers being concerned with mastering routines, adopting interpersonal and passive attitude toward goals, excelling in problem solving and work design, working with people in carefully controlled ways, and seeing themselves as conservators or regulators. So that's more of the management standpoint. And then we shift over to talking about the qualities and characteristics of leaders, where leaders are concerned with vision and judgment, active and visionary about the future, seeking out opportunities and taking risks, being passionate about work and likely to cause turbulence, and seeing themselves as agents of change. And there are a lot of opportunities to learn more about leadership and qualities of leadership, and taking leadership courses and developing leaders of all kinds, whether it be in government, for-profit or nonprofit. In a nonprofit organization, both leadership qualities and characteristics and management qualities and characteristics are needed. So the CEO may fill the leadership role and delegate the management to subordinates, and they can do both. So they may fill the leadership itself, or the visionary, the overall broad picture role, and they also may delegate management to subordinates, the day-to-day functions. Only the CEO can provide leadership of the entire organization. So it is the responsibility of the nonprofit organization to provide leadership to the entire organization. That includes not only working with the board, but with the staff of the organization, as well as the volunteers, and also the constituents and the customers, or the people being served. Leaders define vision, articulate direction, set goals, and influence others to achieve these together. Nonprofits are values-based and mission-driven, which is different from government and for-profit. The values-based and mission-driven is unique to the nonprofit. There's not always consensus about the mission or how to measure performance, so that's a challenge. Financial resources are often voluntary, so that the funds that drive the organization are often given by donations, so that's a challenge for the leadership. Leadership is essential to develop a consensus about the mission and performance, and to articulate a vision that gains and holds commitment of the volunteer board members, service volunteers, donors, and others. So this gets us back to talking about the characteristics of leadership that is required to develop consensus about what the mission is, the performance of the organization, and to be able to articulate a vision that gets the commitment of volunteer board members, service volunteers, donors, and others. The lack of leadership by the CEO of a nonprofit eventually leads to drift, decline, and failure. So these qualities and characteristics will help to ensure that a CEO of a nonprofit organization is successful if they're able to have all of these characteristics of leadership that are required in the day-to-day running of a nonprofit organization. There's leadership theories discussed in this chapter, and the key questions are: leaders born or made? And if they are made, what specific knowledge or skills do individuals acquire to be strong leaders? What do they need to acquire to be strong leaders? What are the specific behaviors that are associated with effective leadership? And then the key caveats are: most of the theories are generic. They're intended to apply to all types of organizations and not just nonprofits, so that makes it less valuable to the study of nonprofits. And also, there may be no one right theory of leadership that's applicable to every situation at all times. So this is the introduction to just different leadership theories and the questions and the caveats, and the discussion that is included in the book will talk about the leadership theories and where there may be no one right leadership theory that's applicable to nonprofit organizations. So like I said before, this is not a class on leadership or leadership theories, but it does apply to nonprofit organizations and how these different theories may or may not apply. So we're going to talk about the trait theories in the book, and this is the emphasis on the innate characteristics of the individual, what traits they have, what's their personality like. And then there's skills theories, which emphasize specific skills that leaders would have, which would be technical, human, and conceptual. Then we move on to behavior theories, which are emphasis on behaviors or actions. And this would include task behaviors, relationship behaviors, and there's a managerial grid by Blake and Mouton in 1985. So read through all this. The contingency theories emphasize the situation, like acting certain ways in certain situations. So there's the contingency theories of leadership. It depends on the circumstances how the leaders will react. And then there's the theory of servant leadership with the emphasis on values and commitment. So transformational leadership is an exchange process in which the leader exchanges rewards or punishments for the behavior of others. Transformational leadership changes people, inspiring and empowering individuals to go beyond self-interest and pursue goals that are in common interest. The emphasis in transformational leadership is on developing personal relationships, appealing to the shared values and the ideals. Transformational leaders use transactional techniques but should not overemphasize them. Nonprofit CEOs must lead more than members. They are also working with donors, volunteers, members of the board, general public. Executive leadership exists when the leader has the power to make decisions. The nonprofit CEOs do not have formal power of the corporate CEOs. So that's something to keep in mind. Executive leadership of a nonprofit organization, executive leadership exists when the leader has the power to make decisions. But in a nonprofit, they do not have the same power as they do in the private sector because they work with the governing board. So that is an essential difference. Legislative leadership is the style that relies more upon persuasion, political currency, and shared interests to create conditions for the right decisions to happen. A nonprofit CEO would be more effective using legislative leadership style than the executive leadership style because they just have that ability to be more effective in that in that way. So that gives you the idea of what transformational leadership is. So as opposed to transformational, we're going to be talking about charismatic leadership. And a charismatic leader is somebody who behaves in a certain way that causes others to see him or her as charismatic. You know when you've seen somebody who is charismatic, you know that the characteristics that they exude. And these behaviors were studied by Rainey in 2003, and this is what the study found, that charismatic leadership it advocates a vision that is different from the status quo but still acceptable to the followers. Charismatic leadership acts in unconventional ways in pursuit of the vision. Charismatic leadership engages self-sacrifice and risk-taking in pursuit of the vision, displays confidence in ideals and proposals, uses visioning and persuasive appeals to influence followers rather than relying mainly on formal authority. So it's the persuasive appeal that's charismatic, and uses the capacity to assess context and local opportunities, and uses the capacity to assess context and locates opportunities for novel strategies. So that was what was found by the study in Rainey in 2003, is those are behaviors that cause others to see person as charismatic. So if you don't know what charismatic is defined as, that it would be included in those items that I just discussed. And then in a study by Fisher in 1984, charismatic leadership showed a need for social distance. So pulling that all together, all the discussions of charismatic leadership and what that is and what that means, what does the effective nonprofit CEO look like? Well, these are the items that were recommended in the text, that a nonprofit CEO should do the following things to be effective. focus on the mission,